Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
What's going on, guys? I'm getting ready to go to Mike Paletta's house. So I made sure I brought my Fritz glasses. Check out his tank. This is probably one of the only times and last times that I'm going to see this the 300 that he currently have in his current system the way it is. For all you guys that don't know, he's doing an upgrade same as me. We're actually using the same tank builders. We did it together, try to save cost, shipping it together, because he's about an hour, 20 minutes or so from me. So I got to get in the house, grab what I need to grab, because I'm going to bring him some Rico seeds for his tank, and let's get over here and see what's going on. But first, let's go box up his corals. So let's go. All right, guys, just got to the basement. I got all his seeds right here, floating, getting ready to go into the box. So hopefully he likes it. You know, I gave him my pink lemonade and some other. He was really set on this pink lemonade, by the way. So I also put out a video prior asking you guys about some questions. If I was to ask somebody that's been in the hobby a long time, you know, what are some of the questions you would like me to ask? So I will be asking those questions here in this video. So make sure you guys that wanted me to ask are here. So let's get these bagged up and let's get on the road. Alright, guys, I'm just pulling in Mike Paletta's residency. So should be fun. Nah, I can't wait to actually see his system. It's just crazy that he decided to go a lot bigger. You know, he talks sometimes he talks about his 1200 that he had. Gorgeous tank, a lot of upkeep, and with most of us, we are, excuse me for the beeping of the car, but for most of us, or for a lot of us that's been in this hobby a long time, we actually develop a thing, basically become hoarders. And there's a lot more we want. There's a lot more we always constantly see what we can do to improve, to expand, and get more for more corals and stuff. So, you know, I see it happen. It happens with me, and I'm sure this system that I got getting ready to get built, I know for a fact this is not my last system. So we're gonna get up in here, and we just pulled in. We just parked. We're actually in the driveway. So let's get in here and see what we got. What's going on, guys? This is Rico at Rico's Aquariums. I'm sitting here. We got Mr. Mike Paletta himself. Been doing some talking. So we're gonna ask some questions. There were some questions that you guys asked me. We're gonna ask him, and let's get to it. All right, Mike, how's it going today?
Very well, a little too hot, but it's summer, so it's what you expect.
Right. Well, we had some people wanted to know, how long is it, have you actually been in the hobby, and any advice that you could give any new person willing to start their first saltwater aquarium?
Well, I've had fish since I was 5. My neighbor's guppies had babies, so I started with a little guppy tank. But in terms of saltwater and reefs, I got my first saltwater tank in 1980, and I got my first reef tank, or well, it was then a reef tank in 1984. So 34 years I've had reef tanks. But a reef tank back then was mainly full of algae, and I had a bubble coral and a leather coral, and that was considered a reef tank at the time. And we were pretty happy if we could keep anything alive. And that's why one of the early corals that a lot of us got were Gonioporas. And it's not that we were successful with them, it's just that they died very slowly. So we've come a long way from that to where we pretty much can keep everything alive. I mean, you can see in this tank, there's a Moorish idol, there's a peppermint hog, there's a lot of cool fish, and there's a lot of different corals. This is my Elos tank. It's quote-unquote pretty much a non-acropora tank. There's a few acros in there, but for the most part, it's a non-acro tank. Now, for beginners, what I would say is, one, read and learn as much as you can, and try to find someone to be your mentor, someone whose tank you can see, whose methodologies you can follow, and then go with what they're doing. Your tank won't be the same as theirs, but it gives you a good background and basics to work from, rather than you take a little bit from here and a little bit from there and a little bit from here, because that doesn't work. I've tried it. You're much more successful if you find someone whose stuff works and then you follow their lead. The other thing, in terms of reading, I would not just read everything on the internet. I would also buy some books. I know people don't like to read books, but if someone puts their name to stuff, they're basically putting their reputation on the line. Versus on the internet, anybody can say anything. And if they are on the internet and you want to believe them, see what their tank looks like. There's a lot of absolutely gorgeous tanks on the internet. Listen to the people that have the gorgeous tanks. It will go a long way toward adding to your success over time. And lastly, be patient. You're not going to have a tank develop overnight. Figure it's going to take 2 years till the tank, from when you put in frags, because most of us now start with frags, for the live rock to cure, for the fish to get established, for everything to be set up to where you're really, really happy with the tank. Figure it's going to take about 2 years to get to that point. If you want something that's going to happen in 3 or 4 months, buy a video, put it on your TV, look at that, that'll be your tank. But if you want to have long-term success, plan on being very patient with it and taking your time.
Well, that's a good point. Also, the other question was, where do you like to run your parameters, and where should other people run their parameters, or what do you think the idea is for keeping a reef tank when it comes to parameters? So
obviously you want to keep things close to natural seawater, but we tend to keep things a little bit higher because we tend to have a little higher nutrients in most of our tanks than you see in natural seawater. In most natural seawater, nitrates and phosphates are fairly close to zero. In our tanks, I generally keep my phosphate between 0.08 and 0.12. I keep my nitrates around 10 parts per million. Alkalinity, I keep between 8.5 and 9.5. Calcium, I keep at 450. Magnesium, I keep at 1450 to 1500. Temperature, I try to keep it between 78 and 80. Salinity, I keep between 1.025 and 1.026. So those are what work for me. Some of those parameters might be different because in your tank you might have higher nitrate or phosphate. You might have some other values higher. Every tank's going to be different. The key is find your sweet spot, but more importantly, find your stability. Find out what parameters you can keep as stable as possible and stick with those. You don't want to have the tank's parameters bouncing up and down, because that's what causes stress on the corals, and that's when we tend to lose stuff to STN and RTN and other problems, versus if you keep things stable, things sort of take care of themselves. So in terms of parameters, that's what I would do. I mean, that's what I suggest to everyone.
That's kind of where I'm at with it as well.
And don't be fixated on the numbers. It's not a competition where you have this and this, and the competition is I'm growing this coral this fast and this coral that fast. Not every coral grows at the same rate, and not every coral will grow in the same rate in everyone's tanks. Some corals grow really well in my tanks. Some corals, like Hydnophora, I've never been able to keep. I've never been able to figure it out. But other corals, like Australian echinatas, do fine for a while, and then they crap out in virtually everybody's tank I know. Nobody I know has them for a long time. Red dragons do well until they get the size of a basketball, then they start to bleach at the bottom, and then they all die off. We don't understand a lot of this. We can grow them like crazy, but the key is growing them and keeping them pretty much forever. We haven't gotten to that point yet for a lot of these corals.
Right. So also with that being said, let's move over to lighting. How important it is for lighting a reef tank, and the differences in between some of the lighting that's out there. Is there any suggestion? Obviously, we're not here to, talk about a specific product. We're not sponsored, but when it comes to lighting, how important is it? Where should the lighting schedule be? How much intensity should a tank receive? All these good things.
Well, as with the parameters, lighting varies from tank to tank, and in a lot of instances, we probably don't need quite as much light. We found out over time, as we're much better with nutrient management and algae management and everything else, that we don't need to keep our tanks blown out with like we used to with metal halides. As we were discussing, we've known people with 300-gallon tanks running 1,000-watt metal halides on them because they thought that's what they needed on the reef to keep the reef going. We found over time that's not what we need, and you tend not to get the brightest colors. You saw the sunlight tank. We'll probably take a look at it in a minute. That originally was started off as an SPS tank with my thinking of, okay, what could be better than sunlight? Well, as I found, when you run max light, you tend to get really nice brown corals. They grow like weeds, but they don't look anything like these corals in this tank. So I've gone to using radions on all my tanks, except for the sunlights out there where I'm running Kessels. But by the time fall rolls around and sunlight diminishes, I'm probably going to roll those into radions as well, just because with the 4th generation ones, I've really had a lot of success with them. I don't run my lights full bore. I run them 80-85% max intensity. Sanjay runs his at full 100% intensity. I tend to run a bluer tank. He tends to run a whiter tank. So it varies based on what your taste is and what you're looking for. The interesting thing is we discussed with Sanjay's tank, if you see his tank under the full 100% lighting, it's everything at full max, it does look like daylight, and the corals are colorful, but they're not like a blue tank. And we're thinking, oh, he doesn't have the colors that most of us have in our tank. But I have now been there at night when he ran the full blue spectrum, and they are as vivid as any corals you'll ever see anywhere. So in this regard, he still had the colors. It just mattered on what color spectrum he was running on the lights. So you can vary it. I use the max color template from Radion, but I also maneuver some of these. Like this tank has a schedule that bounces up and down based on what the Europeans are doing. That is, they run a little bit of 100%, a little bit down to 80%, back up to 100%, back up down to 80%. They do this with a theory that if you run 100% all the time, after 6 hours or so, you've pretty much maximized photosynthesis of the corals and what they can do. So they back it off and bring it up. And the tanks I saw in Europe that were doing this were spectacular. So that's why I do this on this tank, and I do this on the frag tank downstairs. The sunlight tank is blue, and in the wintertime it's spectacular. Right now under bright natural sunlight, pretty much everything looks brown except for the anemones, which are nice colored, but they're not as vivid as they are at night. Nor are any of the corals.
Okay, so with that being said, how important it is to, I get a lot of people asking about how often do I feed the tank, or per se the habitants in the tank, meaning the fish and stuff like that. Do the fish have to be fed every day? If you have nutrients problem in your tank, is it safe to go ahead and cut back from feeding every day? Or is that, going to create aggression in the habitants in the tank? You pretty much get where I'm going.
Yeah, the feeding is an interesting thing, because we used to think, okay, the tank just needs to be fed and the corals will eat just on fish poop. That's not the best way to do it. There's actually been a study done where they looked at constant feeding in the tank. You'd think, well, if you're going to feed the tank constantly, the nutrient levels are going to go through the roof. The reality was constant feeding led to a diminution in the nutrient levels because the fish were much more efficiently able to metabolize. They're not eating this one big bulk meal. It's not like Thanksgiving every day for them. So as a result, they don't create as much waste, so the nutrient levels tended to go down. So in this regard, I try to feed frequently small amounts. Remember, a fish's stomach is about the same size as its eye. So doesn't have a big capacity for holding things. And when you go out on a reef, what you see is the fish eating almost constantly. They're always picking, they're always nibbling. The same in this tank. If you watch the big tangs, if you watch the rabbitfish, if you watch the Moorish idol, they're literally always picking on something. Same thing with each of the tanks. the fish that are nibblers are constantly nibbling. The planktivores, like the wrasses and the damsels and the clowns, they tend to eat small amounts more often from plankton that's in the water. So as a result, I feed this tank roughly 4 times a day because it's close, and when I walk by, I put the food up at the top, and you watch the fish literally pick the food out of the net. Even though it's out of the water, they'll bring it down out of the net to feed on it. The other tanks get fed pellets or flakes when I get home from work. They then get fed around 7 o'clock. They then get fed around 9 o'clock, and then they get one more meal at about 10 o'clock when the lights are all blue. Because certain fish are used to feeding kind of more toward dusk. So everybody gets fed more often. And by doing that, I've been able to keep Anthias alive now for 7 years, fairy wrasses for over 5, and getting a lot of them to keep the colors, which is the main thing that we want. By feeding more often and feeding higher nutrition food, the nutrient levels stay fairly low, and I don't really have a problem with algae per se.
Speaking of food, I know the next question was going to be asked. I'm probably going to have it in the comments of this video. What are some of the foods you like to use to keep fish coloration and, you know, vibrant colors and nutrients? What do you feel as far as fish foods?
Yeah, I feed a variety of things. I feed pellets and New Life Spectrums, all their different formulations. Yeah. I feed cobalt. I feed mysis, different manufacturers of mysis, and I feed LRS. I feed as many different foods as I can, because just like with us, if you ate steak every day, you'd get boring.
I say that all the time.
I mean, I was just cleaning out my freezer in the basement, and I found I probably have 3 years worth of food down there, all kind of different varieties. Because I get lazy and don't like to go out to the garage to get the food, I keep the food closer where it's easier. So one of the things I'm thinking about for the new tank is getting a little small freezer just to hold the food sitting in the bathroom down there, so I don't have to go out to the garage, so it'll all just be sitting there. It's something I'm considering, just as with everything. The easier stuff is, the more likely you to do it. Because I have such a wide variety of food, I don't want to have 20 different varieties of food in my freezer, because then everything starts to smell like fish food. And nobody really likes that smell but us. So in that context, feed it as many as you can, as often as you can, in small amounts. Don't overfeed, and don't think because the fish have you trained that every time you walk in the room and they go up to the top that they're hungry. They have you trained to feed them. They're like a dog. They'll eat any time you want to feed them. Same thing with the fish.
Right. So, one more thing before we move over to the sunlit tank and then to your big display. As far as filtration, maybe just for this tank here, we can talk about filtration. Is the filtration different from the sunlit to the...
Filtration is pretty much the same on every tank.
On every tank.
There's a fish and protein skimmer on each tank. There's a mud filter. There's Caulerpa. There's the softcore tank doesn't have a GFO or carbon filter, but this tank does, and the downstairs tank do. Okay,
one more thing which I almost forgot. How important is it when setting up a tank? Do you feel to use it's important to use live rock versus dead rock?
Well, when I set up this tank, I did it on dead rock. I tried to do it with quote-unquote was the state of the art. Everyone's moving toward dead rock. Sanjay did the same thing at the same time. We both came across a same interesting problem. The corals would be there. They would stay there. They would not encrust. They would not really grow. And after like 2 months, every time they would just go fizzle and fade. And he was seeing the same thing. I saw the same thing. I then went to Europe and started talking with some of the manufacturers and some of the quote-unquote really good hobbyists there. They were trying a lot of the same things we were doing. They all said the same thing. And they all said, you can't just start with all dead rock and be successful unless you want to give it a really, really long time. Because you're not going to have the natural fauna that you get on the live rock. I know we get pests from live rock too, but we also get a lot of natural fauna. We get a lot of natural bacteria. We get sponges, microfauna. A lot of good things come from live rock. So we can't start just from dead rock and expect to see the same kind of results. In this tank, I had that problem for a year. I could never get anything to grow over any kind of length of time. I then have gone to 3/4 live rock from downstairs, put that dead rock in their sump down there to let it get acclimated because it's going to go in the new tank. and then let this grow. And as a result, it's stabilized and gotten much better over time. Is it perfect? No, but it is much better than it was.
And the reason it's probably not perfect is because basically it's still, you know, you got the bacteria, you introduced it, the microfauna, the bacteria.
Right. I also introduced sponges.
Right. And it still takes time, like a coral, like putting a brand new frag in there. It takes a little bit before it starts to encrust and grow. Would it be true to say that, you know, yes, what you did was introduce all these things, but it's going to take a little time still to get it rocking and rolling like we do with our, you know, tanks that are predominantly all live rock.
The new or the dead rock, even the live rock I had wasn't as good as fresh live rock. It was live rock taken from the tank downstairs. It was 8-year-old quote unquote live rock.
Right.
So it's still, this is now roughly 6 months in after all the new live rock is put in.
Mm-hmm.
The corals are starting to take off and grow and do better.
Mm-hmm.
The other problem though is that I've been traveling a lot, and when I travel a lot I don't get to spend as much time doing the little tinkerings that I do. Problems have arose, like when we were in Hawaii, the alkalinity in this tank went to 15. The alkalinity on the tank went downstairs, went to 6. Those are things that take a significant time frame to come back from. So I'm giving the tanks time to come back from that. This tank is now stabilized. Everything's good. Everything's starting to encrust and grow. And all the dosing systems are now working. The additives are going. I'm feeding the tank reefroids and other foods regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Things have stabilized. So it's much better in that regard. But I still took setbacks from new live rock, and then 2 months later having an alkalinity swing that large, and then having literally to wait 3 months for it to come back down, even with water changes.
Yeah,
I didn't want to shock it, so I just sort of let it go down. I mean, the any additional alkalinity was shut off for 3 months while it came down from 15. So it took 3 months for it to come down because I only do once a month water changes. So I wanted to see how long it would take.
Right. Which is good. You know, that's a good point. You don't want to ever shock something back the opposite direction once it's, you know, went one way. You don't want to hurry up immediately, shock it back the other way. It will cause a lot of havoc on the inhabitants in the system. So
yeah, because the corals that had acclimated to that higher alkalinity, if I'd have brought it down to 8 overnight, even though that would have been optimum, they probably would have died. Like this one tipper here did fine throughout that. Other ones perished.
Right.
So the ones that survived, gradually just brought them down, and they've done very well since then.
Sounds good. Well, let's go ahead and move over to the sun lit tank.
Okay.
All right, Mike. Well, here we are. This is the sun-lit tank in the sunroom. What would you like to tell us about this tank and what makes this tank different from the other, how many tanks you have in here actually? Five?
Yeah.
5 tanks?
And a little planted tank, 6 tanks. Yeah, I'm out of control. This tank originally started off as an SPS tank.
Mm-hmm.
And after 4 months, I realized it wasn't going to be a good SPS tank because everything, as colorful as I would put in here, turned brown. So needless to say, that was rather disappointing. So then filled it with soft corals and a fair assortment of fish. And right now it's getting indirect sunlight. In another hour it'll be getting direct sunlight, and it won't even look like the lights are on. And it's nice now because you can pick up some of the colors on some of the corals.
Mm-hmm.
But at night, the Simularias are green. The anemones are rainbow colored. The yellow leather, Fijian yellow leathers look a lot more yellow, and you really pick up the coloration. So while summertime, these are growing like weeds because they're getting so much natural light. In the winter, it's nicer because it's darker longer, so you get much more colorful. The tank looks much more colorful.
Well, it looks truly amazing, and it's crazy how well it's actually doing out here with natural sunlight. But we are talking predominantly, it's really all softies. So do you think that's what makes it more successful dealing with this kind of tank, dealing with natural sunlight versus SPS tank, or what's your thoughts on that?
The SPS just were brown, and if I want to keep brown things, I'm going to keep brown soft corals, so then I at least get movement. And I also wanted a tank that was easier to maintain out here. Because
Right.
we're not close to a water source, so anytime I do a water change or anything, which I only do 10 gallons on this tank once a month, I don't want to really be schlepping lots of buckets of water back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, I made it easy. And I also wanted to keep some other kind of unique fish in here, like the Navarcus angel, the pair of hawkfish. There's some Bartlett's anthias. There's the pair of orange spotted rabbitfish. So it's nice in that the fish are rather tranquil. They're used to activity out here, and lots of big corals and lots of space. You can see underneath the way the live rock's set up, there's lots of caves, there's lots of space for them, so most of the fish are out a lot of the time.
Well, it's truly amazing how it looks. I just sitting here thinking, I got to take a piece of this home with me. You want to talk about this? What exactly is this guy
That's
here?
a purple photosynthetic sponge that I got from Sanjay's tank, and it grows like a purple Capricornus, and then it'll grow in rows. I actually took out a huge piece of it yesterday, about the size of 2 palms of my hand, for my friend Russ Kickle, and I'll get you a piece now too. It grows very well, and particularly this time of year in the summertime. Like I said, it's photosynthetic, so it grows like crazy.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is it spreads on its own, and the little pieces will pop off and then grow in this, like the side of the tank where I didn't expect them, and in the back of the tank where I don't understand how they settle in those spots and then just grow into nice colonies.
Well, it looks awesome. Yeah, like I said,
it's
it's
as deep a purple as anything we put in our tanks.
oh yeah. And these bubble tip and these skunk clowns, man.
Well, that was one bubble tip, and now there's 3 of the same species, and then I have 3 other species in there growing. Now, hopefully, they'll take off like that one did.
Yeah, they look very healthy. Speaking of that, real quick before we move on downstairs, I get a lot of questions on how do you keep bubble tip anemones with their bubbles?
What I have found is you got to keep your nitrates fairly low, under 10 parts per million in this tank.
Okay.
If I go even a little bit above, all they do is get long. They also like to have a fair amount of current, but they don't want to be blasted. As you'll see downstairs, there's 2 bubble tips that split from the mother.
Mm-hmm.
One is kind of in the shade and one that's out in the light. The one that's out in the light has the nice bubbles. The one that's in the shade has the long tentacles. You can see the same thing here. At the back of the tank are 2 green with purple tip bubble tips.
Oh yeah.
And they have no bubbles. They're just long and scrawny because they're just not getting as much light there.
Yep, there it is.
So it's a function of nutrients and lighting to get the bubbles.
Oh, that's a great tip. I'm sure that's going to help out a lot of people. Well, let's get on downstairs and go check out the 300. All right, Mike, now we're down here at the big, we got the 300 here. We have the frag tank for the new build, correct?
Yes.
And then we have the Nano.
Yep.
Let's start here on Nano. While you're talking, I'll put these glasses on, if I can. Hold on. All right, so let's talk about your Nano tank here, and while you talk about it, tell us some things, what you like, what you don't like about it, if there's anything you don't like. And I'll put on some Fritz glasses so they can see it in 2 different ways.
Now, this originally was set up to run on its own, but it became more work to manage than it is the 300. So now it's interconnected. And the reason I wanted a Nano is I found that if I put little fish in the big tank, I only have big fish. They disappeared. So in here there's a magma wrasse that you can see in the center. There's a twin spot blenny. There's 3 firefish. There's 3 cardinal fish. There's a Pseudochromis friedmani in there. There's a lot of nice, quote-unquote, little fish that I like. And this is going to be part of when I go to the new tank. It's going to be a little bit bigger because there's a false back on the back of this tank that consumes roughly 4 inches of the back. And that's going to be taken out in the new tank. And it will allow for me to put more space in here. Because right now it's just jam-packed full of stuff. And I want to have some space for like the euphyllias, and so that they're not bothered with lobophilias, which they tend to burn. Mm-hmm. And give some space for the acans. And remove some of the zoes because they're just grow out of control in this tank. And I thinned these 6 months ago, and they filled in every square inch again since then. So, unfortunately, I don't have the $50 polyp ones, but
Right. That would be nice.
yeah, that would be nice. That would help pay for the new tank.
You ain't lying.
But I will get rid of these and make more space, and try not to add too much stuff to fill it, which is always a problem I have, and allow for more caves and more space that you can look in, rather than just having like one big rock like it is now.
Right.
So I just built, this tank is 26 gallons, the new Nano is 42 gallons.
So, is it going to still be in the same place, or how are you going to do that?
Right now where this Nano tank is and where the frag tank is where the new 500 is going, and where the 300 is where the sump is going.
Right.
So, and it will be wide open and easy to work on, versus there will be nothing under the tanks anymore.
Well, I did notice while you're talking there, check out this frag tank. This frag tank is for everything that's going in the new 500, correct?
Correct.
Which I thought, I mentioned to you, I thought you had sand in these tanks. You have absolutely no sand at all in any of your tanks.
Right.
Why
I've
is
been running
that?
bare bottom for the last 20 years, simply because I tend to run a lot of current in the tanks, and if you run a lot of substrate in your tanks, you tend to have a lot of sand blowing into one spot, or landing on things and killing it,
Yeah.
or a lot of different issues. So I try to minimize that.
So, do you find that it's harder, maybe, or I guess harder for the system to buffer itself with no sand versus somebody with sand, that the sands help kind of like acting as a buffer, maybe?
What I found is that when I ran it as a buffer, it's like the emergency buffer.
Okay.
By running the calcium reactors or dosing reactors, I've been able to keep it where I want, and only if those fail, then the sand would act as a buffer. But if I get to that point, I have other problems anyway.
Yeah.
So keeping the sand level, or keeping the water flow as high as I can, to me is better than worrying about buffering. That orange spotted rabbitfish in here,
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah.
that and the two upstairs all came in at the same time, and they were all about the same size as a relatively small potato chip, and just as thin.
Uh-huh.
This one, for whatever reason, has like tripled in size, versus the ones upstairs have stayed
Yeah, I
relatively
say he
small.
found the
So
miracle grow.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to this one. He's kind of skinny, but he keeps growing bigger and bigger, and these guys will get to be roughly 14, 18 inches in size.
Right.
So he's going to go when I take the tank down. I don't know where he's going to go yet, because the plan is when I take this frag tank down, the Desjardini and the fox face upstairs are going to come out, and they're going to go in the frag tank. But the purple tang, the Tamini tang, the three swallowtail angels, and the bicolor rabbitfish are all going to go upstairs. So there's going to be a whole new group of fish up there. A lot of these other fish are going to either go into the 300 or they're going to go upstairs into the soft coral tank.
Right.
So that when I'm done, there'll only be probably 4 or 5 fish in this tank, instead of the 40 fish that are in here now.
There you go. And last but not least, 300 here. Now this is actually going to be the last time I get to see this tank because of the new builds you and I both got going on.
Right.
I guess as a goodbye to this system, what would you like to, the goods, the bads, the whole 9 yards with this system? Why do you want to get rid of it? Why do you want to plant, or why are you upgrading? And yeah, share some of that with us while we're looking here.
The tank's now been up 8 years, and it was built kind of as an emergency. I was going through a divorce, and a 1,200 gallon tank was in my ex-wife's house, and it was deteriorating fairly quickly. So as a result, I took it down quickly and moved everything into a tank into this tank, and I set it up, but I didn't do as much due diligence and planning as I would. So it's difficult to maintain stuff underneath. There's a lot of things where you got to be a 17-year-old gymnast to get to this equipment to move it. It's not easy to work through in the back. It's just not an easy tank to work on. It's a 300, it's a nice sized tank. The 500 is just going to be roughly 1 foot longer and 1 foot deeper. So in that regard, it's not going to be that dramatically different. So I'll be able to work on it just as well. But what I want to do with the new tank is make everything easily accessible. So the easier stuff is to do, the more likely I am to do it. So changing the skimmer's head's going to have a self-cleaning head. So that's going to make it better, more efficient, me not having to worry about it as much. There's going to be a bigger Destaca reactor to maintain the calcium, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. There won't be a canopy on it, so I'll be able to work in the tank right above it without having to climb on top and manipulate stuff. I'll be able to get behind the tank to work on it. So there are just a lot of things that will make maintaining the tank easier. The flow in the tank will be a huge gyre around the tank. There won't be overflow boxes for nasty critters to hang out in and reproduce in, like Ectasia, Majanos, and other things. So there's not going to be an overflow. So there'll be one more space from that, but there also won't be a reservoir for things to go in. I'm going to make the water flow system more efficient. So there's just a lot of things I want to do. It will be as open or more open than the old system, but I'm going to keep pretty much the same fish. I may add 3 or 4 more new fish to this system, but it's not going to be a big addition of fish. So by doing that and moving some of these other fish out, it'll hopefully make it easier to maintain as well.
Sounds good. Now, real quick, I see you have the, you made a comment about the Destaca. We have the Destaca over here. So far, what do you like about it? Is there anything you don't like about it? I see the controller up here keeps clicking in and off.
Yeah, when the blue light comes on, it's showing that it's taking in CO2.
Okay.
It takes a while to get used to, and when you're first establishing it, you got to measure your alkalinity levels a couple times a day to get them tailored into where you want it by just adjusting one dial. It's not like an old calcium reactor where you had to adjust bubble count, flow through the system, flow out of the system.
And if coming out of the fluid line,
and the pH in the system.
Right.
Here, basically one button fixes it all. It always runs the same, and you control it just with an adjustment of a knob. But you just have to do your alkalinity testing right early on to get it established.
Right.
Once it's established, it's spot on virtually all the time. It's easy to maintain. Taking the reactors apart to put in new media is easy. The only things that you have to do is you have to replace the little EI pump once a year, and you have to replace the tubing in the peristaltic pump twice a year. And you replace the media when you do that. So twice a year I add new media and I replace the peristaltic tubing.
Yeah.
Other than that, it pretty much runs itself.
Well, we talked a little bit about it when it came to the Destacos because it's something I'm considering with the new build myself. And the one thing I noticed was this is definitely different media than what we're used to.
It's a much denser media that dissolves at a slower rate and only at a lower pH. So you have to use their media, and it is somewhat expensive, but you don't have to change it out as often as I had to do the other media.
Right.
When I was running a georeactor. Also, unlike the georeactors or the other reactors, it pretty much doesn't turn to mush at the bottom of the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't have to take it apart, dump it all out, clean it, or
Clean
anything
it.
like that.
Yeah.
But if it does start to turn to mush, there's valving on the bottom. You just open the valve up, drain it, and the gunk comes out of it. So I've done that once in the year that I've had it up, and it's pretty simple to do.
So would you say it'd be safe to say that you will never go back to the older style, or and you're very content on these Destacos, or
I always wanted to stock on this big SPS tank. Upstairs, for a bigger tank, this is the ticket.
Okay.
For a smaller tank like upstairs, that 90-gallon Elos tank, I'm running a dosing pumps to bring in calcium, magnesium, and buffer. So in that regard, for a smaller tank, it's easy to do. For a bigger tank, this is the ticket.
All right. Well, any last words or encouragement for any new hobbyists?
Like I said upstairs, take your time. Like when you look at the size of some of these corals, like the Milka Scalafra in the center of this tank,
Yeah.
that had 3 fingers when it was originally placed there. So that's what it's grown into in a year and a half.
Wow. All right, well, let's take a quick look before we got one more tank. We got a planet tank that we got to talk about real quick.
Yep, my wife's tank.
Yeah, your wife's. So, I don't know. Does everybody know you got married?
Yeah, everybody knows.
Everybody knows. Okay.
Yeah, no secret.
All right. Mike has officially got married again, and he's happy, and she is actually very lovely, and my wife and her are sorry for their absence. They're...
Yeah, 5 months ago I got married.
5 months. 5 months.
So it shouldn't be a secret now.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. 5 months. So let me try this with the glasses on here real quick before we go upstairs. I know I'm probably missing something, but that's okay. We got plenty of time. We got a new tank build coming up.
Yeah, this tank does have some issues. While I was in Hawaii, the alkalinity reactor stopped working, and as a result, the alkalinity dropped to under around 6.2. So that was problematic. And since then, I've had some issues with STN, and it's slowing down, but it's taken 3 months for it to calm down.
Right. Well, that's nothing new for any of us that's been in the hobby a very long time. We're not new to STNN or RTNN or any of that, or those times we're on vacation and stuff happens. Always happens when we are on vacation. And one thing I like to tell people is, when you know you're going on vacation, don't ever touch anything on your tank prior to leaving.
Right. Don't make any changes. I mean, you can do a water change before you go.
Yeah.
But don't be adding new equipment. Don't be adding new fish. Don't be adding new corals.
Nothing. Yeah. So, all right. Well, Mike, let's go upstairs and check out your wife's tank before we end this. So, let's go.
That sounds.
All right, Mike, before we end it, I wanted to get up here and talk a little bit about this planet tank that you set up for your wife, correct?
Right. We saw this tank at Reef in Orlando, and she immediately said, "I want that tank." And I said, this will get you some interest in the hobby, I'll get it for you, no problem. We bought it, they shipped it, and she's enjoyed it. She works on this tank way more than I do. It's a unique design in that it's a typical planet tank on the left side, and then it uses terrestrial plants as the filter on the right. We've done water change on it in 2 months. It took about 15 minutes because it was 5 gallons. And the main reason we did it, we were having a problem with hair algae, because like every tank I have, it's way overstocked with fish, and we were way overfeeding. We settled down on that. The hair algae's gone away. Still a lot of fish. Actually, we get to watch this every night when we're having dinner. It's a nice, calm tank, like I said, with my old planet tank. That's the one thing I like about a planet tank versus a reef tank. The fish, you can literally reach your hand in and pull them out of the tank. They're much calmer than saltwater fish. And it's coming along nicely. The plants are growing.
Yeah.
The fish are thriving. I mean, knock on wood, we've not lost a single fish except they jumped out of the tank. So I had to make a screen for the tank to keep the stupid hatchet fish from jumping out. And other than that, it's been good, because there's been 3 silver and 2 marble hatchet fish in here since the beginning. We lost 2 of the marble hatchets before I put the screen on, so we replaced those. Other than that, there's cardinal neon tetras, which I've had difficulty with in a lot of tanks in the past, doing well. There's angels that have pretty much doubled in size since we got them, so we're going to have to trade those in and get a couple more small ones. There's a bunch of pencil fish, there's rummy nose tetras, and believe it or not, there's a plecostomus and a catfish in here to keep the bottom clean. And we just feed the plecostomus pellets every night, and he's been doing well. And
doing great, huh?
He's an interesting fish to watch. And
oh yeah. So, did you start off these plants really small, or?
Actually, they came from my old Planet tank.
Oh, okay.
They came in, but they were all covered with algae. We cut a lot of them back to throw away the algae ones, the plant ones that were dying. And now they've gotten a lot better. We also added 3 Amano shrimp, which also helped to eat the hair algae. So in that regard, the tank is coming along. It looks twice as good now as it did a month ago. And it seems to get better every week. Because now there's a Madagascar lace plant that doesn't have any hair algae. It's starting to grow. I mean, that'll fill in the whole tank at some point. We'll have to get rid of that. But there's some Barclaya longifolia, which is a red plant. There's some odd crypts on the bottom. There's an Anubia. There's a Java fern. And then there's terrestrial plants here. There's lemon balm. There's purple leaf parsley. There's mint. And in the back, there's 3 water bamboos. So it's an interesting tank in terms of all the stuff that's going on in it. Obviously, I don't recommend adding this many fish to a tank,
Right.
but I had the fish that were in my old tank. I couldn't get rid of them.
I don't think it would not be you. You know, you're the man that always just has to have all these fish. So it's just your signature. I think we're all used to you and all your fish.
Yeah, but I'm even amazed that these fish have done this well in this little tank. Excuse me.
Okay.
Excuse.
Uh-oh. There we go.
Sorry about that.
You're okay.
But even, I mean, there's a pair of honey gouramis even in here. They're little tiny gouramis, and the male's in breeding color right now. So that could be interesting. But from the standpoint of lots of fish, lots of activity, but it's not like in a reef tank.
Right.
It's a much calmer activity.
Soothing. Well, Mike, I just want to thank you for having me come out here. Greatly appreciate it, man. And hopefully you enjoy some of the Rico seeds that I brought you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we'll definitely have you out in the fall once the new tank's up.
Yeah. And
we'll have you out in the evening when you can see all the tanks under the lighting and how much better it looks at night. It looks good now, but at night the tanks are spectacular.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Like I said, I just want to thank you for having me out here. I mean, obviously we both got 2 big mega builds getting ready to be within the next month or so. So we got a lot on our plates, but just want to say thanks, man, and we'll be back out.
Yep, my pleasure. Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.